Anyway, let's bring her
Super
in.
excited for this. Let's see.
Thanks so much for joining. We're having some fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for joining. Can you give us?
I'm surprised that Delian didn't join. By the way,
Yeah,
because Pavel was about to have this
I
amazing.
was
This
wondering.
first.
Do
first
not send
appearance.
Delian the link. He will just bomb.
I think he
bar
has the
this
link.
interview. He does
That's
have the
the big
link.
secret,
Don't let him
right?
know that he can use the link because he will
He's a
just
very
hop
good
on.
hype man.
He's a great hype man. Anyway, yeah, would you mind just a brief introduction and give us a little high level of the book?
Sure. I'm Nadia, writer and researcher. I just published this new book called Anti-Memetics: Why Ideas Resist Spreading. And it's about this idea of anti-memes, which are self-censoring ideas. So ideas that we find really interesting and compelling in the moment, but for whatever reason, they kind of resist sharing or being remembered. So I think we usually think that if an idea is good or interesting or compelling, it's going to find a way to share or be shared or spread on its own. But there's this whole other class of ideas. So things like taboos, forbidden ideas, stuff we don't really talk about in public, cognitive biases, so stuff that we are sort of like blind spots about ourselves that we don't really realize. All of this kind of forms this class of ideas that are anti-mimetic and don't spread super easily, even though they're interesting, important ideas. So that's what I wanted to write about.
How much of memetics is just actually compressing the idea down? I was thinking about how Lulu's going direct manifesto has this really pithy phrase, going direct, founder mode, same thing with the network state, kind of two words that really hits, versus Leopold Aschenbrenner wrote a fantastic essay about AI, called it situational awareness. We don't see people using situational awareness as a meme to talk about acceleration and where the future of AI is going. Is it just a packaging problem? Or is there something about the ideas itself that creates an anti-mimetic property?
Yeah, I think some of it is a packaging problem. Like ideas themselves have these innate qualities that are mimetic or anti-mimetic. Some of it is just about like how the person perceiving that or receiving it is like how do they interact with that idea? So you can think of certain ideas that are spread really, really easily in certain networks, but not in others. Conspiracy theories are a good example of this. So yeah, I think it's a mix of both. It's partly about the idea. It's partly about the person that is like sharing it or receiving it.
Sure. Jordy?
Well, one, I want to make this segment like the most beautiful ad for your book, so I'd like to go like through a number of the ideas. I did want to. A book had been going viral, and I got a copy of it. I wanted to get kind of your high level take on it. It's funny there was this was maybe it released in 2021. There is no anti-memetics division. It sort of went viral a little bit last year, but then it is no longer like for sale, or I guess you can buy it, or the paperbacks are trading. Is that the
Hundreds
great
of dollars on eBay right now.
Yeah, so I have one. I should probably, just sell it and buy like 20
No,
copies
keep
of your
holding.
book.
Keep holding.
No,
You're
keep
sitting
it.
on something that's worth a million.
But I just thought the great irony of like, they were maybe going after like, something similar to what you've been researching it, but then it's not even available anymore. So it's like not
They're dog
spreading.
fooding
Do you
anti-memetics.
do you have any sort of like
Take on that
I'm
book.
curious, like,
Yeah,
and then
definitely.
more broadly, like, in researching this, like, what's the full breadth of what you were kind of like looking at, right? Because I imagine you were researching and finding like forbidden PDFs and books in a bunch of different areas, right? Of like this sort of esoteric knowledge that humanity ignores for some reason.
Yeah, I'll give a big plug for Quantum, who wrote "There Is No Anti-Memetics Division," and he actually coined the term anti-meme like back in the day, and it originates from this fiction, like horror sci-fi kind of online wiki. And so yeah, he published that book, I think 2021. It's a horror science fiction book, and it's about anti-memes as this sort of like anthropomorphized creatures that are kind of like these black holes. They destroy everything they touch. They consume everything that comes in contact with them. But for whatever reason, we can't seem to remember that we've interacted with them. And so there's this intelligence unit that is trying to fight anti-memes, but like can't even remember that they're doing it. Hence the title, There Is No Anti-Memetics Division. Super cool book. Highly recommend it, and all of his writing, honestly. And that was the first book I read back in 2021 that kind of kicked off my interest in the topic. I had never heard of the concept of anti-memes before this. And yeah, I was reading that book kind of like depths of COVID. Yeah, 2021, sad, dark times, but like also,
Weird time to be
it was
reading
kind of
it.
the time everyone was doing stuff in like group chats, and they were doing stuff like Clubhouse was a thing, and I had been working at Substack, and so I was thinking a lot just kind of about like how does this concept apply to the real world, and like where do anti-memes show up in the rest of our life? So it was definitely direct inspiration for this book. But yeah, I wanted just kind of like a nonfiction treatment of the
Totally.
concepts.
Totally. It
Yeah.
was not practical in any way. It was just sort of like you said, a sci-fi horror
Exploration of a
exploration of
topic.
it.
Yeah.
I feel like
Can you talk
the
about,
best way that yeah,
yeah,
inspired
Yeah.
can you talk about, like, I feel like we're in such a weird time. Like, our generation was sort of like not born on the internet, but we sort of like gained consciousness on the internet. And the internet is something that just like circulates ideas, both like fact and fiction, like extremely rapidly. And so, in many ways, like conspiracy theories and these like sort of forbidden, potentially truths, or maybe it's fiction, you know, you don't know. There's sort of like, I feel like I've grown up in a world where I don't, you know, like
Yeah.
the only conspiracy theory I believe is that there are just like many conspiracies going on and all sorts of things at all times, right? So can you talk about like, yeah, I think like what can people take away maybe from your book in terms of how to just like process information online when you don't know if something is completely false or an idea that or something that's factual, or maybe it's an idea that's sort of just anti-mimetic and it doesn't want to be known or it doesn't want to be identified as truth.
Yeah, I thought about that a lot while I was writing this, just because I think there's a lot of doom and gloom about kind of like where the internet is right now, or like
Mhm.
social media didn't turn out to be what we expected. And I really didn't want to write that kind of a book, and because it is partly about this transition from, once upon a time it was you could post whatever you wanted on Twitter and you weren't worried about like getting, trolled, canceled, attacked, whatever. And a lot of people, I think part of why we kind of withdrew to group chats and these more private spaces is because we kind of just, wanted to tune out all of that. But I really wanted to show that it's not that one is replacing the other. It's not like, oh, Twitter or whatever is over and we're just gonna all like go back into our little caves and only talk to our friends. But like both of these things actually feed off of each other. And all the things that get workshopped in the group chats kind of make their way back out into public channels and vice versa. And I think like there are things about that are good and bad. And maybe to your point, just about, yeah, not being able to even tell what's real anymore. But like group chats aren't really like a safe haven from whatever is happening in public channels, because they end up kind of like becoming these super incubators for crazy ideas. And so ideas can get even crazier and even weirder when they're being workshopped by like a small group of people. And so in some ways they're kind of like mutating and making ideas even crazier. But yeah, I mean, not to be like overly defeatist about it, but I think it is also kind of like your reality is what you make of it. And like where we decide to direct our attention, what we decide to focus on, that is what your reality becomes. And so maybe that's a little bit scary or destabilizing to people to feel like they can't tell what's real anymore. But I also think if you just can find ways to harness your attention and focus on the
Well,
things you actually care about, then life is not really so bad. So
yeah, and like you compared like, you know, what's happening in sort of the town square, like something like X, and then what's happening in group chats, right? Like oftentimes like we're in this world where there's sort of this like fiction appearing on the timeline, and then the truth is like racing through group chats, and on a long enough time horizon they intersect, right? Because like they almost like an idea can be like put out there and maybe people agree with it in the moment, but then eventually sort of what's happening in the sort of like private group chats like actually does start spreading and sort of like breaking containment. And in many ways it feels like that's happening faster than ever, right?
Yeah, I wanted to ask a question about kind of like practicality here. I think a lot of founders and business folks think about, can they align their company or their mission or their vision of the future along with a meme or condense it down? Obviously, the going direct thing has been a great encapsulation of like what Lulu does, and it's helped her business as opposed to, in addition to helped people that have adopted that strategy. Is it possible to do the opposite, to take an attack on you and somehow twist it into an anti-meme so that the idea that is hurtful to you or your business or whatever becomes harder to discuss?
interesting. Yes, definitely. Yeah, I do talk in the book about this idea of like obscurantism, which
Mm.
Nick Bostrom coined, but the idea of like, can you make things boring or can you kind of hide them as a way of sort of suppressing them? So if you think about like suppressing ideas, people often think about like putting a hard like a hard lock on it so that, make it forbidden, make it password protected, whatever. But that often makes people more excited to figure out like what is actually going on under there.
Yeah.
But if you make it really, really boring and really uninteresting and like, or just like really difficult to parse, people kind of just lose interest and wander away. And that's definitely that would be like an anti-mimetic information warfare tactic, I guess.
I've seen this where I've seen people chirping at each other on X, and I've noticed that whoever puts up the longer piece of content usually ends the conversation. So you post, I like SpaceX, and then I quote tweet you, and you're like, SpaceX is terrible. But then if you quote tweet back with something that's just like an essay, I'll just be like, oh, I'm tired, I'm out, and you kind of win by default.
Filibustering.
And I've also seen these attempts to take a legitimate attack vector and then wrap it in political extremism on the left or the right. And so if you're being attacked by someone, you can say, oh, well, like that's an idea from 4chan, or that's an idea that's from the Communist Manifesto. So we should disregard it and put it in the forbidden category, even if it's a legitimate criticism of whatever's going on. And so I don't know. It's a fascinating topic.
Can you talk about some of the differences between anti-mimetic ideas and anti-commercial ideas? And anti-commercial, I would put something like intermittent fasting in that bucket, where nobody makes money if people eat less, right? Like it's sort of this idea that like there's whole conspiracies around intermittent fasting, which is like big breakfast was like came in and they're like, you got to eat a big breakfast, and like there's a bunch of people that benefit from like the big breakfast complex, and then if you start going around and saying like, hey, you can just have coffee or water and like just eat lunch, like it's hard to monetize that, right? It's not like I can be like, hey, don't eat food and also like pay me to like teach you how to not eat food, and some people have done that, but like I feel like there's maybe a line between ideas that are anti-mimetic and like just don't spread for one reason, and then stuff that's maybe like slightly more obvious, but it's just like not spreading because there's no like sort of economic or commercial interest that's like trying to spread a certain idea.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I hadn't actually thought about that yet. I think like there's still plenty of ideas that can spread mimetically even without sort of like a commercial engine behind them. So folk wisdom, aphorisms, things like that. But you're right that having, especially I think in like the realm of like health related things, I'm just thinking about like a lot of chronic health issues and stuff like that, where people kind of have to like bumble around and like find their own answers to things. And it's partly, even if they're like, chronic health issues that tons of people are facing and dealing with, there's no like clear answer to them. And I think sometimes when the answer is something that can't be monetized or sold, then if we think of it as just like another engine for driving the spread of information, if that engine is missing, then something kind of might languish and not reach everyone that it should. So yeah, that's super interesting.
How do you think about Elon's positioning with XAI around this sort of like truth-seeking AI? Like, is it possible that a properly trained LLM could be more inclined to spread ideas that are sort of anti-mimetic within humans, yet like the machine is just like, you ask it a question, it's like, well, obviously like this is like what you're dealing with, whereas a human would tell you some other answer that maybe was like more correct in some ways.
I think it could be really useful for like ideas that are anti-mimetic on an individual level. Like I know some people will use AIs for this, where it's like, tell me, based on the conversations we've been having, like tell me something about myself that I don't know or I don't realize, and maybe just having someone that can just tell you straight up what the answer to that is versus your friends who might kind of not be super honest. That could be useful. I still think it's like really hard to spread things that are like taboos or forbidden ideas through a network. So even if one person really believes it and is totally bought into an idea, like how do you get it to actually spread from person to person? And it's a little bit harder to think about like how that takes place.
Well, I'm super excited
cool.
for the book.
I'm
Congratulations.
Yeah, we should do like once we get a full copy here and it's like actually ordering, we'll do a deep dive on it.
Yeah, and we'd love to have you back.
We're going to try to, we'll have you back on, and we'll help the audience figure out how to make money.
How to make money from anti-memetics. Because that's the theme of the show.
That's what's really going to get the book.
Yeah. How do you, my competitor? No one's ever heard of them now all of a sudden. No one can remember them. Yeah. They just disappeared from the internet.
They're gone.
Because we put anti-memetics to work in capitalism. Fantastic having you. Thanks so much for coming on the show.
Yeah.
And congratulations. Two-time author now. Fantastic.
Incredible.